A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
I was looking at my kitchen counter this morning and realized I have a bottle of vitamin D sitting right next to a prescription for some antibiotics I finished last month. It struck me as odd how I treat them with the same level of casual trust. I just pop the vitamin D and assume it is doing what the label says, even though the regulatory journey that bottle took is worlds away from the antibiotics. It is what I call the supplement paradox. We walk into a massive, brightly lit retailer, see rows of professional-looking bottles, and we assume there is a rigorous safety net catching every batch. But today's prompt from Daniel is about the supplement industry and evidence-based medicine, and it is a perfect excuse to dig into why that trust might be a bit misplaced.
Herman Poppleberry here, and I have been waiting for us to tackle this one because the supplement world is essentially the Wild West of modern healthcare. Most people do not realize that the moment you cross the line from a pharmaceutical drug to a dietary supplement, you are entering a completely different legal and scientific dimension. In the United States, we are living in the shadow of a very specific piece of legislation from 1994 called the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, or DSHEA. It is the defining line between what we consider medicine and what we consider, legally speaking, food.
DSHEA. I have heard you grumble about that before. You have called it the original sin of supplement regulation. Why is a 30-year-old law still the biggest factor here in 2026?
Because it fundamentally redefined what a supplement is and, more importantly, how it is policed. Before 1994, the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, had a lot more teeth to regulate these products. If a company wanted to sell a concentrated herbal extract, the FDA could treat it more like a food additive or even a drug, demanding safety data before it hit the shelves. But the industry lobbied incredibly hard. They framed it as a matter of consumer freedom and access to natural health. The resulting law classified supplements as a subcategory of food rather than drugs. This created a massive regulatory chasm that we are still falling into today.
So, if it is classified as food, does that mean the FDA treats my bottle of ashwagandha the same way they treat a box of crackers?
In many ways, yes, but with even fewer guardrails. For a pharmaceutical drug, you have to prove it is safe and effective through Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3 clinical trials. That process takes years and costs hundreds of millions of dollars. The burden of proof is entirely on the manufacturer to show the FDA that the drug works for a specific condition and that the side effects are manageable. Only after that mountain of data is climbed can a single pill be sold to the public.
And for supplements, that burden is flipped, right?
It is completely inverted. Under DSHEA, the FDA is actually prohibited from requiring pre-market approval for supplements. A manufacturer can formulate a new herbal blend, put it in a bottle, and start selling it tomorrow without ever showing the FDA a single scrap of data proving it does what they claim or even that it is safe for long-term use. The FDA can only step in after the product is already on the market and only if they can prove it is actually dangerous. It is reactive instead of proactive. The FDA has to play a constant game of catch-up, waiting for people to get sick or for adverse event reports to pile up before they can issue a recall or a warning.
That seems like a massive loophole for efficacy. If I sell a bottle of pills and claim they support brain health, I do not actually have to prove they make anyone smarter.
You do not. And that brings us to the structure function claim loophole, which is the cornerstone of supplement marketing. You will notice that supplement bottles never say cures Alzheimer's or treats depression. If they did, they would be legally classified as unapproved drugs and the FDA would shut them down instantly. Instead, they use vague, carefully calibrated language like supports cognitive function or promotes a positive mood or maintains joint health. As long as they include that little asterisk and the mandatory disclaimer saying the FDA has not evaluated the claim, they are legally in the clear. They are implying a medical benefit without having to meet a medical standard of evidence. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry built on the power of suggestion.
It is a clever bit of linguistic gymnastics. But surely, if I am buying these from a major retailer, there is some level of quality control? I am not buying them out of the back of a van. If I go to a big-name pharmacy or a massive online retailer, they have vetted their suppliers, right?
That is a very common misconception, and honestly, it is a dangerous one. Consumers assume that a store like GNC, Target, Walgreens, or Walmart acts as a filter for quality. But these retailers are often just the final link in a global, incredibly opaque supply chain. In 2015, the New York Attorney General's office ran a massive investigation that sent shockwaves through the industry. They used DNA barcoding to test what was actually inside the herbal supplement bottles sold at these major national retailers. They looked at things like ginkgo biloba, St. John's wort, ginseng, and echinacea.
Oh, remember that? What did they find?
They found that 4 out of 5 products tested did not contain any of the herbs listed on the label. 80% of them were essentially fakes.
Wait, 80%? If the herb wasn't in there, what was I actually swallowing?
Most of them were just cheap fillers like powdered rice, beans, asparagus, or even pulverized houseplants. In some cases, they found substances that were not listed on the label and could be dangerous for people with allergies, like wheat or soy. The retailers and the manufacturers pushed back hard, arguing that the DNA testing was flawed because the high heat and chemical processing used to create extracts can degrade the DNA beyond recognition. But even if you give them the benefit of the doubt on the DNA, subsequent tests by other independent labs often find that the active compounds, the actual chemicals that are supposed to provide the health benefit, are either missing or present in such tiny amounts that they are clinically useless.
So the seal of approval from a big store name is essentially an illusion of safety. What about third-party testing? You see these labels like USP or NSF on some bottles. Does that bridge the gap?
It helps, but it is vital to understand what it actually verifies. A USP, which stands for United States Pharmacopoeia, or an NSF International seal, means a third-party lab has verified that what is on the label is actually in the bottle. They check for purity, they ensure it does not contain harmful levels of contaminants like lead, arsenic, or mercury, and they check if the pill will actually dissolve in your stomach instead of passing through you like a pebble. But, and this is the crucial part, it does not guarantee that the supplement actually works. You could have a perfectly pure USP certified bottle of magic beans that does absolutely nothing for your health. Purity is not efficacy.
That is a vital distinction. So if we look at the market as a whole, what percentage of these supplements actually have real, peer-reviewed, double-blind clinical evidence behind them?
It is a vanishingly small number. If you look at the thousands of products on the shelves, maybe less than 10% have robust human clinical trials supporting their specific formulation. Many companies will engage in what I call science by association. They will cite a study done on a specific compound in a petri dish or a mouse and then claim their pill, which contains a tiny fraction of that compound, will have the same effect in humans. Or they will cite a study done on a high-quality standardized extract from Europe and use it to market their own low-quality unstandardized version. It is a massive leap of faith that the data just does not support.
It feels like we are paying for a lot of expensive urine in most cases, but I want to push back a bit because some things do work. We have covered the humility of the present before, especially in episode 546, where we talked about how today's medicine might look barbaric in 80 years. Is it possible that the science just hasn't caught up to some of these traditional remedies?
That is absolutely a fair point, and it is why I love looking at how other countries handle this. The United States has this weird binary where something is either a highly regulated drug or a totally unregulated food. But if you look at Germany, they have a much more sophisticated middle ground. They have a body called Commission E.
Commission E sounds like a secret society. What do they actually do?
It was a governmental regulatory agency established in the late 1970s. They brought together scientists, doctors, and toxicologists to systematically review over 300 herbal substances. They did not just look at anecdotes, they looked at clinical trials, field studies, and experimental research. They produce these detailed monographs that specify exactly what an herb can be used for, what the dosage should be, and what the side effects are. In Germany, if a doctor prescribes an herbal medicine that has a positive Commission E monograph, it is treated as a legitimate pharmaceutical. It is what they call phytotherapy.
So it is evidence-based herbalism. That seems so much more rational than just letting everyone guess. How does that compare to what they do in Israel? Daniel's prompt mentioned the health funds there, the Kupo Cholam.
Israel has a really fascinating model because of their universal healthcare system. The health funds, like Maccabi or Clalit, actually have integrated medicine departments. They do not just ignore supplements, they incorporate evidence-based ones into the formulary. For example, if there is strong evidence that a specific supplement helps with a condition, the health fund might subsidize it or have their physicians routinely prescribe it. It is not about being pro-supplement or anti-supplement, it is about being pro-evidence. They are willing to look at the data and say, okay, this specific brand of standardized ivy leaf extract actually works for pediatric coughs, so we are going to cover it in the Sal HaBriut, the National Basket of Health Services.
It is interesting because that integration actually creates more safety, doesn't it? If a doctor is prescribing it, they are looking at the whole picture of what the patient is taking. That brings up the issue of polypharmacy. I imagine there are some pretty nasty interactions when people start self-prescribing these natural remedies alongside their FDA-approved drugs.
This is where it gets genuinely dangerous. There is this pervasive myth that natural equals safe. But biology does not care about your marketing labels. Take St. John's wort, which is a very popular herbal supplement for mild depression. It is well documented that it interacts with an enzyme in the liver called CYP450.
I remember that one from my biology classes. That is the enzyme responsible for breaking down a huge percentage of pharmaceutical drugs, right?
Specifically the CYP3A4 isoform. When you take St. John's wort, it acts as a potent inducer of that enzyme. This means your body starts clearing out other medications much faster than it should. It can render birth control pills ineffective, leading to unplanned pregnancies. It can cause organ rejection in transplant patients by lowering the levels of immunosuppressants like cyclosporine. It can make certain heart medications or even HIV drugs completely useless. Because people think it is just a natural herb, they often do not even tell their doctors they are taking it. There are also issues with things like golden seal or even high doses of vitamin E, which can interfere with blood thinners like warfarin and increase the risk of internal bleeding.
That is terrifying. You are trying to help your mood, and you end up accidentally causing a medical crisis because your life-saving drugs aren't staying in your system long enough. It really highlights why we need that global integration where supplements are part of the medical conversation, not a side hustle. We talked about this in episode 496, looking at how small nations often have to be more rigorous in their reviews because they can't afford to waste money on things that don't work.
It really does. And it is not just interactions, it is also the second-order effects of people delaying real medical treatment because they think a supplement will fix the underlying issue. If you are taking a supplement for heart palpitations instead of seeing a cardiologist, you are taking a massive gamble with your life. The industry thrives on the idea that there is a secret natural cure that Big Pharma is hiding, but the reality is that if a supplement truly worked and was safe, a pharmaceutical company would have already patented a concentrated version of it.
So let's talk about the stuff that actually works. We've been pretty hard on the industry, but there have to be some gold standards. What are the supplements that have actually stood the test of time and have the data to prove it?
There are a few that I think are genuinely worth the shelf space. First on the list has to be creatine monohydrate. It is one of the most researched supplements in history. There are hundreds of studies showing it is safe and effective for increasing muscle mass and strength. But more recently, we are seeing robust data for its neuroprotective benefits and its role in cognitive health, especially in older adults or those with high stress levels. It is cheap, it is stable, and the evidence is overwhelming.
I use creatine myself, and I have always found the data there to be surprisingly robust. What else?
Vitamin D3 is another big one, especially for people living in northern latitudes or who spend most of their time indoors. We have clear evidence that vitamin D deficiency is linked to bone health issues and immune dysfunction. Now, you should still get a blood test to see if you actually need it, because taking massive doses when you aren't deficient doesn't provide extra benefit and can even be toxic. But as a supplement, it has a very high safety profile and clear clinical utility. Often, it is paired with vitamin K2 to ensure the calcium it helps absorb actually goes into the bones and not the arteries.
And what about the brain and heart stuff? Omega-3s?
Omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA from fish oil, have very strong data for cardiovascular health, particularly in lowering triglycerides. There is also emerging evidence for their role in reducing systemic inflammation. But again, quality matters here because fish oil can go rancid easily. You want a product that is third-party tested for oxidation levels and heavy metals. If it smells incredibly fishy, it is probably already oxidized and might actually be pro-inflammatory.
So we have creatine, vitamin D3, and omega-3s. That is a pretty short list compared to the aisles and aisles of bottles at the store.
It is. You could maybe add magnesium to that list, specifically magnesium glycinate or citrate for certain populations with sleep issues or muscle cramps. Perhaps some specific probiotics like Lactobacillus rhamnosus G for antibiotic-associated diarrhea. But the core lesson here is that the list of things that definitely work is tiny compared to the list of things that might work or probably do nothing.
So if I am a listener and I am looking at a new supplement, how do I actually vet it? We can't all be Herman Poppleberry reading German monographs all day. What is the practical evidence-based filter?
My first stop is always PubMed or the Cochrane Library. If you search for the name of the supplement and the word meta-analysis, you can see if researchers have looked at the collective data from many different trials. A meta-analysis is much more reliable than a single study funded by the company selling the product. I also highly recommend a site called examine.com. They are an independent organization that does deep dives into the clinical evidence for thousands of supplements without taking money from supplement companies. They give you a matrix of how strong the evidence is for different health outcomes.
That is a great resource, and I suppose the most important piece of advice is just to talk to your doctor. Even if you think it is just a harmless vitamin, tell them everything you are taking.
Please do. Specifically, ask them to check for drug-nutrient interactions. There are databases they can access that will tell them if your vitamin E is going to interfere with your blood thinners or if your calcium supplement is going to block the absorption of your thyroid medication. Do not assume that because it is over the counter, it is invisible to your internal chemistry.
It feels like we are moving toward a world where this won't be such a guessing game. In episode 690, we talked about precision medicine and how one size fits none. Do you think we will eventually get to a point where we have pharmacogenomic testing for supplements?
I think that is the inevitable future. We already know that certain genetic variants, like the MTHFR gene, affect how you process folate. Other variants affect how you convert beta-carotene into vitamin A. Eventually, your doctor might say, based on your DNA, you are a poor absorber of this specific nutrient, so you need this exact dose of this specific form. We are moving away from the shotgun approach and toward a sniper approach. But until then, we have to be our own advocates and stay skeptical of anything that sounds too good to be true.
The danger is assuming that natural means safe or that a price tag equals efficacy. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry that thrives on our desire for a quick fix, but biology is rarely that simple. We need to remember that supplements are essentially unrefined drugs that haven't gone through the rigorous testing we demand of everything else in the medicine cabinet.
It really isn't simple. The complexity of the human body is staggering, and the idea that we can just drop a random herb into the machinery and expect it to only do good things is, frankly, a bit arrogant. We need to respect the chemistry. If a substance is powerful enough to change your physiology for the better, it is powerful enough to change it for the worse if used incorrectly.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. I am definitely going to be looking at my vitamin D bottle a little differently tomorrow morning. Before we wrap up, I want to say thanks, as always, to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. We literally could not do this without them.
If you found this episode helpful, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really does help other people find the show and join the conversation. This has been My Weird Prompts.
Find us at myweirdprompts.com for all our past episodes and ways to subscribe.
Until next time, stay curious and keep checking those labels.
Goodbye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes